The black woman was just having tea. Then the mafia boss's mother changed her life forever. Taryn Casey sat alone at a corner table in the hotel's elegant tea room, her fingers wrapped around a porcelain cup of Earl Grey as if it were the only familiar thing in a world that had suddenly become too bright, too loud, too expensive. The afternoon wedding reception of her former college roommate Hannah Park swirled around her, champagne flutes catching the light from crystal chandeliers at the Grand Hyatt Seoul. Guests in designer handbook and Western couture moving like graceful swans across polished marble floors. And Taryn had never felt more out of place. Her simple cream blouse and black slacks were a whisper among the roar of silk and diamonds. An ordinary black American woman with student loans that haunted her inbox and calloused hands from double shifts, who had scraped together every dollar for the flight from Atlanta to Seoul to support her friend's big day, utterly unaware she was stepping into a world far more dangerous than she could imagine. That's when she noticed him. Across the tea room, near the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Han River, a man sat alone with his own cup of tea. Tall, broad-shouldered, wrapped in a charcoal suit so perfectly tailored it looked like it had been sewn onto his body. He was devastatingly handsome in a cold, remote way. Sharp cheekbones, a strong jaw, eyes dark as midnight that seemed to absorb everything around him. A thin scar traced from his temple to his cheekbone, adding an edge of danger to his aristocratic features. Even from across the room, he exuded an aura of quiet, controlled power that made the air feel heavier. Unlike the laughing guests, his expression remained distant, watchful, those obsidian eyes scanning the crowd as if he stood guard even here. Taryn wondered who he was. Perhaps one of the groom's business associates or one of Hannah's mysterious older brothers she'd heard whispers about but never met. Before she could look away, an elegant figure appeared beside her table without warning. Taryn started, nearly knocking over her teacup. Hannah's mother, Park Seon-hee, stood there in a dove-gray handbag embroidered with silver thread, her dark hair swept into an impeccable updo with a jade hairpin. The older woman's face held a gracious smile, but her eyes, sharp, calculating eyes, were edged with something Taryn couldn't quite name. Until Park Seon-hee leaned in close, bringing with her a subtle scent of jasmine and an urgent whisper that turned Taryn's blood to ice. "Pretend you're my son's fiancé." Taryn blinked, certain she had misheard. Her Korean was passable, but maybe she'd gotten something wrong. "I'm sorry, what?" Park Seon-hee's manicured fingers closed around Taryn's wrist beneath the table, her grip surprisingly firm for a woman draped in silk. "Please, Jeeble," she breathed, desperation cracking through her composed facade. "It's an emergency. Just for tonight. I wouldn't ask if it wasn't a matter of life and death." Taryn's heart slammed against her ribs. Her gaze darted instinctively toward the man in the charcoal suit. He had set down his cup, a faint scowl etching between his dark brows as he surveyed the room. He must be Park Seon-hee's son. Tae-hwan Park, Hannah's older brother. She had heard he was intensely private, that the family had all but given up hope of him settling down despite being in his mid-30s. She certainly hadn't heard he was engaged. A murmur rippled through the guests nearby, and Park Seon-hee's face went pale beneath her flawless makeup. "That man approaching," she whispered, a tremor of genuine fear threading through her voice. "Kim Dong-yu. He must believe Tae-hwan is engaged. There's no time to explain. Will you help us, Taryn?" Jabal. Taryn followed her gaze. An imposing gentleman in an ivory white suit was cutting through the crowd like a blade through water, flanked by a younger man with cold, calculating eyes and a cruel twist to his lips. Other guests greeted him with polite bows that seemed stiff, forced. Conversations died in his wake like flowers touched by frost. Even without knowing his name, Taryn felt a primal warning prickle down her spine at the predatory grace in his every step, the way the crowd parted for him, the way no one dared to meet his eyes directly. Her mouth went dry. She barely knew the Park family beyond Hannah. Every instinct screamed at her to refuse, to slip away from whatever darkness she was being pulled into. She had enough problems of her own, her sister's medical bills, the student loans, the 2 jobs barely keeping her afloat back in Atlanta. But Park Seon-hee's hand trembled against her wrist. And if a man like Kim Dong-yu expected Tae-hwan to have a fiancé, what would happen when he discovered it was a lie? What would happen to Hannah's wedding? To this family who had welcomed her despite knowing nothing about her past? Taryn thought of her sister Soo-yeon lying in that hospital bed back in Atlanta. Thought of all the times she'd wished someone would just help. She drew a breath, made her choice. "All right," she whispered, her voice steadier than her pounding heart. "I'll do it." If you want to know what happens when this black woman from Atlanta meets the dangerous Korean mafia boss face to face, hit that subscribe button right now. This story is about to take you places you never expected. Now let's continue. The instant Taran nodded, Park Seon-hee drew her to her feet with the poised ease of a woman accustomed to steering everything from the shadows. She threaded her hand through Taran's arm as if they were a longtime mother and daughter-in-law, then guided her through the glittering sea of guests toward the man in the charcoal suit. With every step, Taran's heart pounded harder. She could feel Kim Dong-gyu's gaze burning into her back, closing in with each passing second. Tae-hwan Park looked up as they approached, his midnight eyes sliding over his mother before settling on Taran. For a split second, she caught a flicker of surprise in that look. Whether at her presence or her appearance, she couldn't tell, but it vanished so quickly she wondered if she'd imagined it. Tae-hwan rose, nearly 8 inches taller than she was, and before Taran could say a single word, his hand was already at her waist. The heat of his palm seeped through the thin fabric of her blouse, and she almost startled. It was the first touch, firm and claiming, as though he'd done this 1,000 times. Park Seon-hee's satisfied smile appeared at the exact moment Kim Dong-gyu stopped in front of them. He was tall and lean like a blade, silver-streaked hair combed back to perfection, eyes black as 2 bottomless pits. The smile on his lips was courteous down to the finest detail, yet Taran felt the danger radiating from him like heat from a furnace. Seon-hee, Kim Dong-gyu said in a warm, low voice, dipping his head in a respectful bow. A wonderful celebration. Your daughter makes a beautiful bride. Thank you, Sajangnim, Park Seon-hee replied, her voice not trembling in the slightest. We're honored by your presence. Kim Dong-gyu nodded, then turned to Tae-hwan, his gaze sharp as a razor. Tae-hwan-si, it's been too long. I hear you've been very busy with your ventures. Tae-hwan answered in a tone as calm as a frozen lake, speaking in fluid Korean. Work never stops, Sajangnim, you know that better than anyone. Kim Dong-gyu's eyes drifted to Taran, and she felt as though that penetrating stare stripped her bare. He studied her from head to toe, unhurried, unhidden, taking in her brown skin, her natural curls pulled into a simple bun, her foreign features. And who is this? His voice was sweet as honey and cold as ice. He switched to heavily accented English. I don't recall meeting this lovely young woman before. Tae-hwan tightened his hold at Taran's waist, drawing her closer against him. He replied in English, his own accent minimal and precise. This is Taran Casey, my fiancé. Kim Dong-gyu's silver brows lifted. Yakonja, fiancé. He repeated the word as if tasting an unfamiliar dish. How surprising. Tae-hwan Park has finally decided to settle down, and with a Miguk Saram, an American no less. Why haven't I heard of her? Because I don't like parading my private life, Tae-hwan said, and there was steel in his voice. Taran doesn't belong to our world. I wanted to keep her away from its complications for as long as possible. Kim Dong-gyu blinked, the smile still in place, but his eyes sharpened. Our world, he stressed the words. You speak as though it's something wicked. I only want to congratulate you. He turned to Taran, took her hand before she could react, and lifted it to his mouth for a light kiss. His skin was cold as ice. Miss Casey, he said in English, never taking his eyes off hers. You're very brave to choose to step into this family. I hope you know what you're walking into. Taran swallowed hard, but she didn't falter. She lifted her chin and answered in a steadiness that surprised even her. I know where I am, sir, and I know who I'm standing beside. A brief flash of surprise lit Kim Dong-gyu's eyes. Then he gave a soft laugh. There's fire in you. Good. You'll need that, girl. He released Taran's hand, then inclined his head toward Tae-hwan and Park Seon-hee. Enjoy your evening. We'll speak later, Tae-hwan-si. Then he turned away, and the young man with the cold eyes, whom Taran would later learn was Sang-hoon, Kim Dong-gyu's son, followed close at his side. The look he threw her before disappearing into the crowd made her shiver. When they were gone, Park Seon-hee let out a quiet breath of relief, but Tae-hwan still didn't loosen his hold on Taran's waist. She looked up at him and met those midnight eyes staring down at her with an emotion she couldn't decipher. You did well, he said softly in English, his voice low like distant thunder. But the night isn't over yet. A few yards away, Kim Dong-gyu halted beside a marble pillar, his gaze still fixed on the Park family. Sang-hoon stood beside him, waiting. Where did this black girl come from? Kim Dong-gyu murmured in Korean, his voice cold as frost. Find out everything. Sang-hoon nodded, a cruel smile blooming on his mouth. I'll handle it, Abiuji. Kim Dong-gyu took a sip of his champagne, his eyes never leaving Taerin as she stood in Tae-hwan's arms. If this is a trick, he said slowly, then the Park family will pay very dearly. The moment Kim Dong-gyu disappeared into the crowd, Tae-hwan's hand at Taerin's waist tightened. It was no longer the affectionate touch of a fiancé, but an iron clamp wrapped in velvet. "Come with me," he said softly in English, and there wasn't a trace of warmth left in his voice. Taerin didn't have time to protest. Tae-hwan was already steering her away, his strides long and decisive, threading them between clusters of guests who laughed and chatted as if they were nothing more than a couple slipping off for a little privacy. Park Seon-hee followed behind, her face still wearing its practiced social smile, but her eyes were full of worry. They stopped in an empty corridor behind the grand hall, where the music and laughter reached them only as a distant murmur. The lights back here were dimmer, casting restless shadows that danced along the silk-papered walls. Tae-hwan released Taerin's waist and turned to face her. His eyes were now cold as steel. "Who are you?" he asked in English, his voice low and dangerous. "And why did you agree to take part in this farce?" Anger flared in Taerin's chest. She'd risked her life to help his family, and this was how he treated her. "I'm Hana's friend," she replied, lifting her chin and meeting his gaze head-on. "And I agreed because your mother begged me. She said it was life or death. If you've got a problem, take it up with her. Don't take it out on me." Tae-hwan's eyes narrowed. He wasn't used to being answered back, and it showed plainly on his face, yet instead of exploding, something flickered in his look. Maybe curiosity. Maybe something else Taerin couldn't read. Park Seon-hee stepped forward and set her hand on her son's arm. "Tae-hwana, don't blame her. This is my fault. I didn't have any other choice." She drew in a deep breath and continued, her voice sinking lower, switching to Korean. Taerin caught bits and pieces, something about pressure, about a political marriage, about Kim Dong-gyu wanting his granddaughter to become Tae-hwan's wife. Tae-hwan clenched his jaw, responding in rapid Korean that Taerin couldn't follow, but she caught the anger in his tone, the brief edge of concern. Then he turned back to her, his gaze cutting straight through. "Taerin Casey," he said slowly in English as if reading out a sentence. 29 years old, born in Atlanta, Georgia. Orphaned at 10 when your parents died in a car accident. Raised by your grandmother until she passed when you were 18, working 2 jobs, barista by day, restaurant server by night, owing $22,000 in student loans. He paused, those midnight eyes boring into hers. "And you've got a sister named Soo-yeon, 25, in Grady Memorial Hospital with lupus nephritis, needing a kidney transplant that costs $150,000, and you've got no way to pay for it." Each word hit Taerin like a hammer to the chest. She stumbled back a step until her spine met the cold wall. "How do you know all that?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "I investigate everyone who steps into my family's life," Tae-hwan answered, his tone flat, unmoved. "You're Hana's college friend. You were invited to the wedding. That's reason enough for me to look into you." Taerin felt stripped bare. She thought she was invisible, just an ordinary girl no one bothered to notice, but this man, a man she hadn't even met before tonight, knew more about her than the people she called friends. "What else do you know?" she asked, bitterness rising. "My favorite food. The music I listen to?" Tae-hwan was silent for a moment. Then he said, his voice slightly softer, "Peonies. You like peonies. You stop at the flower stand near your cafe every Sunday morning when they're in season, even though you can barely afford them." Taerin's heart seemed to stop. She stared at him, unable to speak. "Why?" She finally found her voice again. "Why would you care about details like that? About someone like me?" Tae-hwan didn't answer right away. He looked at her, those stormy depths deep and unreadable. Then he turned to his mother, his jaw tight, speaking in Korean. Park Seon-hee nodded and slipped away, leaving them alone. Tae-hwan looked back at Taerin. "Right now, we've got a bigger problem. Kim Dong-gyu doesn't believe it. He's going to investigate you. And when he finds out this is a lie, he won't just come after my family. He'll come for you and your sister." The blood drained from Taerin's face. Soo-yeon, her sister, the only person she had left in this world. "So what am I supposed to do?" she asked, her voice gone rough. Tae-hwan looked at her, and for the first time tonight, Taerin saw something in his eyes besides coldness. Maybe respect. Maybe something more dangerous than that. "We need to talk," he said, in private. "There's an offer I want to make you." The wedding ended beneath a blazing sunset over Seoul, but Taerin couldn't remember anything about the rest of the night. She moved through it like a machine, smiling when she was supposed to smile, nodding when she was supposed to nod. Her hand always looped through Taehwan's arm as if they were a couple drunk on love, but her mind kept spinning around what he'd revealed, around the fact that she wasn't invisible at all, the way she'd believed. When the last guest finally departed and Hana was whisked away by her new husband in a white Mercedes, Taehwan appeared at Taran's side like a shadow. "The rooftop garden," he murmured in English. 5 minutes. Then he was gone before she could answer. Taran stood on the rooftop garden overlooking the glittering Seoul skyline, the cold autumn wind cutting through the thin fabric of her blouse and raising gooseflesh along her arms. The city spread out below like a carpet of neon lights, a sea of Hangul signs and high-rises that still felt foreign to her even after a week in Korea, but she didn't see its beauty. She only saw numbers dancing in her head. Hospital bills piling higher and higher. Soo-yeon's pale face every time Taran video called from Seoul. Footsteps sounded behind her, and she didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Taehwan's presence drifted toward her as he stopped beside her, close enough for her to feel his body heat, but without touching. For a moment they stood in silence, both staring into the neon darkness. "I've got an offer for you," Taehwan said at last, his voice low and even, as if he were discussing the weather instead of her future. Taran turned to him. Light from the hotel spilled across his sharp features, carving strange bands of brightness and shadow. "What do you want?" Taehwan kept his gaze fixed ahead as he spoke. 3 months. You play my fiancé for 3 months. You show up with me at events. You live in my house. You convince Kim Dong-yu and everyone else that we're real." Taran gave a dry, humorless laugh. "And why would I agree to something that insane?" Taehwan turned to her, those midnight eyes unblinking. "Because in return, I'll cover the full cost of your sister's transplant. $150,000 transferred to Grady Memorial within 48 hours. And I'll clear your $22,000 in student loan debt." Taran's heart seemed to stop for a beat, then slammed into a wild rhythm. She opened her mouth but no sound came out. $150,000. The kind of money she could work her whole life and still never be sure she'd earn. The kind of money that could save Soo-yeon's life. "You're buying me," she said, her voice shaking. "I'm hiring you," Taehwan replied coldly. "There's a difference. This is a business transaction. You provide a service. I pay. Nothing personal." Taran turned away, gripping the railing so hard her knuckles went light. Everything inside her screamed to refuse. She didn't belong in this world, a world of expensive suits and threats whispered behind smiles. She was just an ordinary black girl from Atlanta trying to survive one day at a time. Then she thought of Soo-yeon, thought of her sister's eyes closed on the hospital bed, the steady beeping of the dialysis machine, the doctor's warning that if they didn't find a donor and couldn't afford the transplant within the next few months, it would be too late. "What if I refuse?" she asked, her voice gone rough. Taehwan stood beside her, his eyes still on the distance. "Then you're free to walk away, but you should know Kim Dong-yu saw your face tonight. He'll investigate you. And when he discovers this was an act, he won't be pleased. Kim Dong-yu isn't the kind of man who accepts being deceived." "What will he do?" Taran asked, even though she was afraid of the answer. Taehwan turned to her, and for the first time, she saw something in those piercing stare that came close to pity. "He'll send a message, and Kim Dong-yu's messages are usually written in blood." He paused. "You can run back to Atlanta, but you can't run forever, and your sister can't run at all." Taran closed her eyes, the sensation of being backed into a wall tightening around her ribs. She had no choice. She'd never had a choice. Her life had been a chain of forced decisions ever since she was 10 years old, standing in that hospital corridor and learning her parents were never coming home. "Are there rules?" she asked, opening her eyes to look at him. "Yes," Taehwan said. "You won't reveal the truth to anyone, not even Hana. You'll appear with me when I ask. You'll live in my house to ensure your safety and maintain credibility. And you won't ask about my business." Taran met his gaze without looking away. "I've got one condition." Taehwan tilted his head slightly, waiting. Taran drew a deep breath, then said it, her voice steadier than she expected. "Don't ever lie to me about anything. If you can't tell the truth, then stay silent. But don't ever lie." Taehwan studied her for a long moment, his steel-cold depths unreadable. Then he nodded. "Fine." He held out his hand, large and sure. Taran stared at it, knowing that once she took it, her life would never be the same. She thought of Soo-yeon, thought of her smile back when she was healthy, thought of the vow Taran had made to herself, that she'd do anything to protect her. Then she reached out and placed her hand in Taehwan's. His grip was warm and steady as it closed around hers. "Deal," Taryn said, her voice carrying into the cold Seoul night. "But don't ever lie to me." Taehwan tightened his hold slightly, and something flickered in his midnight eyes that she couldn't name. "I don't ever lie, Miss Casey," he said. "It's one of the few things I've still kept." And standing there on the rooftop of the Grand Hyatt Seoul, her hand in the hand of a Korean mafia boss, Taryn wondered whether she'd just saved her sister or sold her soul to the devil. This is just the beginning of Taryn's journey into a world she never knew existed. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what happens next. Trust me, you'll want to see how this unfolds. Now, let's continue. 1 week later, a sleek black Genesis GV80 rolled to a stop in front of Taryn's cramped apartment in West End, Atlanta. She stood on the cracked sidewalk with 2 battered old suitcases holding everything she owned, staring at the building she'd lived in for 4 years. It wasn't worth anything, just a 1-bedroom walk-up with thin walls and a window that faced the parking lot. But it was hers, the only place she belonged. Now she was leaving it behind to step into a world completely unknown to her. The flight back to Seoul took 14 hours, and when the car finally turned onto the tree-lined private road that led to the Park Estate in Gangnam, Taryn had to fight not to gape. The mansion rose before her like something out of a Korean drama, a modern, architectural masterpiece of white stone, dark wood, and floor-to-ceiling windows, surrounded by meticulously manicured gardens with stone pathways, ornamental ponds, and ancient pine trees. Her entire apartment building could have fit inside this place's living room, and there'd still be space left over. The car door opened, and Taryn stepped out on legs that felt unsteady. A man in his early 30s with a friendly smile was waiting at the entrance. He had a stocky build, kind eyes, and an air of competence about him. "Miss Casey," he said in accented but clear English, bowing slightly. "I'm Minjun, Mr. Park's head of security. Welcome to your new home." Something about the way he said home made Taryn want to laugh. She doubted home was the right word for this place. Gilded cage felt more accurate. Minjun helped carry her luggage inside, talking as he walked, introducing the house like an enthusiastic tour guide. The dining room on the east side, the kitchen to the south, the library on the second floor. "If you need anything at all, just call me," he said with a warm smile. "I know it can feel overwhelming at first, but you'll get used to it. Mr. Park isn't as bad as he looks. Just give him time." Taryn wanted to ask more, but the sound of footsteps from the floating staircase made her turn. Taehwan was coming down, still in a charcoal 3-piece suit, as if he'd just stepped out of an important meeting. His face showed nothing, and his midnight eyes swept over her like he was taking inventory of a new acquisition. "Minjun," he said in Korean, then switched to English. "Leave us." Minjun vanished as quickly as he'd appeared, leaving Taryn to face Taehwan by herself in the vast entrance hall. "Follow me," Taehwan said and started back up the stairs without waiting. Taryn trailed after him through long corridors lined with contemporary Korean art that probably cost more than her entire education until they stopped in front of a sliding door. "Your room," Taehwan said, pushing it open. "It connects to mine through that door, so if anyone breaks in at night, they'll believe we sleep together." Taryn stepped inside and had to pause, trying to process what she was seeing. The room was enormous, minimalist and elegant, with a king-sized bed dressed in white linens, silk curtains in soft gray, and a balcony overlooking the gardens. Traditional Korean elements mixed with modern design in a way that was both foreign and beautiful, but it wasn't the luxury that made her throat tighten. On the nightstand, in an elegant ceramic vase, sat a fresh bouquet of pink peonies. The familiar scent spilled into the air, carrying her back to Sunday mornings in Atlanta when she'd stop at the flower stand near her cafe, spend what little money she had left to buy a single stem because it was the only indulgence she allowed herself. Taryn turned to Taehwan, and he was watching her with an expression she couldn't read. "I had them arranged," he said, his voice calm, as if remembering a stranger's favorite flowers were the most ordinary thing in the world. "Rules: don't go out alone. Don't reveal your real identity to anyone. Don't go into the basement level. Breakfast is at 7. I'll let you know when I need you to appear with me." Then he turned away and moved toward the door connecting their rooms. "Rest. You'll need your strength." The door slid shut behind him, and Taryn stood alone in the lavish room, her hand drifting without thought to the soft peony petals. She didn't know what she was supposed to feel, cared for or controlled, protected or imprisoned. Maybe both. And that frightened her more than anything else. 2 weeks passed, and Taryn slowly grew used to the strange rhythm of life inside the Park estate. Every morning she woke at 6:30, showered, and came down to the dining room at 7 sharp, exactly as Tai Hwan required. They sat across from each other at a table that could seat 12, eating breakfast in silence. Tai Hwan read the Korea Economic Daily. She drank her coffee and stared out at the gardens. Sometimes he asked a few short, precise questions in English. She answered, and the quiet settled over them again. It wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It was something closer to ease, as if they'd both accepted they didn't need to perform when it was only the two of them. In the afternoons, Taryn usually sat in the library with a book or wandered the gardens. Minjun was always somewhere nearby, far enough to give her space, close enough that she knew she was being protected, or watched. She still couldn't tell which. Tai Hwan was rarely home during the day. He vanished into meetings no one explained to her, and he usually returned after dark, midnight eyes tired but still sharp as a blade. They lived under the same roof like two planets moving in separate orbits, crossing now and then drifting apart again. Until that night. Taryn was sitting in the dark kitchen, one hand wrapped around her phone, the other gripping the edge of the marble counter. The call from Grady Memorial kept echoing in her head. Soo-yeon's condition had worsened. The infection was spreading. They needed to move up the transplant timeline, 2 weeks instead of 2 months. 2 weeks, 14 days. Taryn didn't cry. She'd forgotten how a long time ago, back when she was 10 years old, standing in that hospital corridor while a doctor told her that her parents hadn't survived the crash. Back when she learned tears didn't change anything, that the world didn't care about the pain of an orphan child. She just sat there in the darkness, feeling like she was sinking to the bottom of the ocean with no strength left to swim up. Footsteps made her look up. Tai Hwan stood in the kitchen doorway, still in the dark suit from his evening meeting, his tie loosened. He watched her for a long moment, those midnight eyes unreadable in the dim light. Taryn waited for him to ask what she was doing, or remind her of some rule, or simply turn away as if he hadn't seen her at all. That was what she was used to in this life. People saw her, then they left. But Tai Hwan did none of those things. He walked into the kitchen, pulled out a chair and sat down beside her. He didn't say a word. He didn't ask. He didn't comfort her. He just sat there in the darkness next to her. And maybe it was the quiet. Maybe it was the night hiding both their faces, but Taryn began to speak. She told him about the night of the accident, about the 10-year-old girl who'd been staying at her grandmother's house, who'd gotten the call in the middle of the night. She told him about the years of grief, about her grandmother's struggle to raise 2 granddaughters on a fixed income, about learning how to become invisible to survive. She told him about Soo-yeon, the only sister she had left, the one she'd sworn to protect at any cost. Tai Hwan didn't speak. He just sat there and listened, his presence like an anchor that kept her from being pulled under by the undertow of memory. Taryn didn't know how long she talked. Maybe minutes, maybe hours, but when she finally fell silent, drained by everything she'd said, her eyelids felt impossibly heavy. She rested her head on the table, meaning to close her eyes for just a moment. And then darkness gathered her in. When Taryn opened her eyes again, morning sunlight was spilling through the window of her bedroom. She was on her bed, still wearing last night's clothes, a soft blanket pulled over her. Someone had carried her from the kitchen up here. Someone who smelled like sandalwood and cedarwood. Her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. She opened it and had to read it 3 times to be sure she wasn't dreaming. Patient Soo-yeon Casey has been transferred to Emory University Hospital. Transplant surgery has been scheduled for Monday next week with Dr. Catherine Mills, a leading nephrologist. Compatible donor has been secured. All costs have been paid in full. Taryn rushed down the stairs, her heart pounding out of control. She found Tai Hwan in the dining room, drinking coffee and reading the paper like every other morning. As if nothing had happened. "What did you do?" she asked, her voice shaking. Tai Hwan didn't look up. "You'll need to be more specific." "My sister, Emory, Dr. Mills, the donor." Her hand struck the table, and his midnight eyes finally lifted to meet hers. "Our agreement was that I'd cover the transplant." Taryn shook her head. "But that was after 3 months. You said after 3 months." Tai Hwan set his coffee cup down. His face stayed blank, but something had shifted in his eyes. A trace of warmth she'd never seen there before. "I don't lie, Miss Casey," he said, his voice low and even. "I only did it sooner." Then he stood, fastening the buttons of his suit jacket again, and walked past her. "Eat breakfast. You'll need your strength to video call your sister." Terrence stood there watching his back disappear through the doorway. And for the first time since she'd stepped into this house, she realized Taehwan Park might not be entirely the block of ice he wanted the world to believe he was. Something else lived beneath that cold shell, and that frightened her more than the danger he represented, because she could fight an enemy, but she didn't know what to do with a man who made her heart tremble. If you're feeling this story, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling me what you think about Taran and Taehwan so far. Your support keeps these stories coming. Now, let's continue. 1 week after Suyun's successful surgery, Taehwan walked into Taran's room carrying a large black garment box. There's a charity gala at the Shilla Hotel tonight. This is our official debut in front of Seoul High Society. He set the box on the bed. Wear this. Then he walked out before Taran could say a single word. She opened the box and had to hold her breath. Inside was an evening gown, a deep emerald silk with a fitted bodice and flowing skirt, elegant and sophisticated with subtle Korean-inspired details in the embroidery. Beside the dress sat a smaller velvet case holding a jade jewelry set, necklace, earrings, and bracelet. The jade stones glowed against the velvet like captured moonlight. Taran had never touched anything so expensive in her life. 2 hours later, she stood before the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. The dress fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her alone. The jade burned against her brown skin, creating a striking contrast. Her natural curls were styled into an elegant updo. She no longer looked like a barista with calloused hands. She looked like a woman who belonged to a world of extravagant parties and lethal secrets. Taran descended the staircase, one hand gently lifting the hem. Taehwan was waiting at the foot of the stairs in a flawless black tuxedo, looking like he'd stepped off a magazine cover. But when he lifted his gaze to her, something shifted. Taehwan went still, his jaw tightening, his midnight eyes darkening like the sky before a storm. He didn't speak. He only looked her over from head to toe and back again, and that look made Taran feel as if she were standing in fire. "Gaja, let's go," he finally spoke, his voice lower than usual. He didn't tell her she was beautiful. He didn't offer a single sweet word, but that gaze said more than 1,000 compliments ever could. The Shilla Hotel glittered tonight like a palace. Hundreds of guests in their most expensive clothes moved beneath crystal chandeliers, a mixture of traditional hanbok and Western evening wear. The air buzzed with Korean, English, and other languages blending into an atmosphere so lavish it felt hard to breathe. Taran entered with Taehwan, her hand resting on his arm, and she felt every gaze swing toward them. Whispers rose like surf. They danced the first waltz of the evening. Taehwan's hand settled at her back, warmth pressing through the silk, while his other hand clasped hers and guided each step. Taran had never learned to waltz, but with Taehwan, she didn't have to. He led her as if they'd danced together 1,000 times. Every step fitting perfectly, every turn smooth as flowing water. She felt his breath brush her ear as he leaned down to murmur instructions in English. Every time their skin touched, a current shot along her spine. She looked up and met his midnight eyes, no longer icy cold, but burning like embers beneath ash. The music ended too quickly. Or maybe it lasted forever. Taran had lost all sense of time. Tai Huan Si. A familiar voice cut through the moment. Taran turned and felt her blood turn to ice. Kim Dong-gyu stood there, a polite smile on his lips but eyes black and sharp as knives. He looked from Taehwan to Taran, then back to Taehwan. "The couple of the evening," he said in Korean, then switched to English. "All of Seoul is talking about you. I'm still curious about your love story. How did you meet?" Taehwan's hand slid to Taran's waist, drawing her closer against him. "Nothing special. I saw her in a cafe in Itaewon." Taran went rigid. What was he doing? "Did you?" Kim Dong-gyu lifted a brow. "Tell me." Taehwan looked down at her, and something in his gaze made her heart stutter. She was working. A child at the next table started crying, and the mother looked like she was about to lose her mind. Taran stepped away from the counter, went over to that table, and smiled at the baby. She didn't say a word. She just smiled. He paused, and the baby stopped crying. That's when I knew. Taran stared at him, her heart beat wild. She remembered that day, her second day in Seoul, killing time at a cafe in Itaewon before Hana's wedding events began. She remembered the baby, remembered the smile she'd given it, but she didn't remember seeing Taehwan there. Kim Dong-gyu studied them for a long time, then gave a slow nod. "A good story. I hope it's true." Then he turned and dissolved into the crowd. Taehwan led Taran out onto the terrace where the cold autumn air washed away the heat of the grand hall. They stood side by side in silence, looking down at the glittering Seoul cityscape below. Taryn could feel the hairpins biting into her scalp, aching after hours. She winced and lifted a hand to pull them out. "Let me." Taihwan's voice was low and gentle. Before she could react, his fingers were in her hair, carefully loosening each pin one by one. The gesture was so tender, Taryn had to hold her breath. This wasn't the cold Taihwan she'd grown used to. This was a different man. A man hidden behind an icy mask. "Did you really come to that cafe?" she asked, her voice no more than a whisper. Taihwan didn't answer. He removed the last pin, let her curls fall to her shoulders, then stepped back. "We should go back inside. It's a long night." He turned away, leaving Taryn standing there with her heart pounding in a question without an answer. But his silence said everything. He really had been there. He'd seen her before she'd ever known he existed, and that changed everything. That night, Taryn couldn't sleep. The image of Taihwan on the terrace, his fingers gently removing the pins from her hair, those deep midnight eyes offering no answer, all of it kept spinning through her mind like an unending whirlpool. She turned over on the bed, staring up at the ceiling in the dark, wondering what she was doing, who she was becoming inside this house. Then she heard a sound. A dull, heavy noise drifted up from somewhere below, like voices in conversation or a low moan. Taryn sat up, her heart beating faster. She knew the rule: don't go into the basement level. But curiosity, or maybe fear, pulled her out of bed. She slipped down the stairs in the darkness, bare feet moving softly over the heated floors. The sound grew clearer as she neared the door leading to the lower level. The door Taihwan had forbidden her to open. It was cracked open, a thin ribbon of light spilling through, and Taryn couldn't stop herself. She pressed her eye to the gap, and the world she thought she understood shattered completely. Taihwan was standing there, his shirt sleeves rolled up to his elbows, dark stains splashed across the white fabric. In front of him was a man tied to a chair, his face swollen and soaked with blood. Min Jun stood beside them, his expression stone cold, nothing like the friendly security chief she'd met. Taryn couldn't hear what they were saying. Taihwan was speaking in rapid Korean. She only saw him lean in, say something to the man, and then the man screamed in pain. She clapped a hand over her mouth to keep from making a sound, but her foot slid back and knocked into a decorative vase beside the door. The noise was small, but it was enough. Taihwan lifted his head. His midnight eyes cut through the darkness and met hers. Taryn didn't wait. She turned and ran. Ran as if the devil himself were right behind her. She flew up the stairs into her room, slid the door shut and locked it. Her back pressed against the wood, her whole body shaking, her breath coming in harsh bursts like she'd just run a marathon. This was the truth. This was who Taihwan Park really was. Not the man who'd sat beside her in the dark kitchen, not the man who'd removed her hairpins on the terrace. But someone who could torture another human being without changing expression. A knock at the door made her flinch. Taryn. Taihwan's voice was low and even on the other side. She didn't answer. She couldn't. "I know you're afraid," he continued, his tone holding no apology. "And you've got every right to be. I'm not sorry for who I am or for what I have to do to protect my family." Silence for a moment. "But I'm sorry you had to see it." His footsteps moved away, then faded into nothing. Taryn stayed there all night. She didn't sleep. She didn't cry. She just stared into the darkness and wondered what kind of hell she'd stepped into. The next morning, she went down into the garden. She needed air, needed to escape the four walls of the room that felt like it was closing in on her. She sat on a stone bench beneath a gnarled pine tree where she usually read during quiet afternoons, but nothing was quiet anymore. Taihwan appeared like a shadow and sat on the bench opposite her. He wasn't wearing a suit the way he usually did, only a white dress shirt with the sleeves still rolled up, though there was no blood on it now. He looked out into the distance, nodded her, and began to speak in English. "I was 17 when my mother was killed." Taryn went still. She hadn't expected him to talk at all, and she hadn't expected him to tell her this. "She was my biological mother," Taihwan continued, his voice steady, as if he were reading a weather report. "Not Seon-hee." He paused. "The Kim family wanted to send a message to my father, and they chose her. I came home from school and found her in the garden. They didn't kill her quickly." Taryn felt nausea rise. 4 short sentences and she could picture everything. The 17-year-old boy stepping into a house that was too quiet, the metallic scent in the air, the horror that would never fade. "I didn't choose this world." Taihwan finally looked at her, his midnight eyes full of darkness. "I was born into it. I can't escape it. but I swear I'll never let anyone I care about be hurt the way my mother was. Never again. Taryn's heart skipped a beat. Anyone I care about. Who was he talking about? His family. Park Seon-hee. Hana, of course. But the way he looked at her as he said it, those midnight eyes burning like embers, stole her breath. He was talking about her. They sat in silence for a long time, the morning wind rustling through the pine needles overhead. Taryn thought about what she'd seen the night before, about blood and violence, about the world she'd stumbled into. Then she thought about the man sitting across from her, the boy who'd lost his mother as a teenager, who'd grown up on pain and cruelty, and yet could still be gentle enough to remove each pin from her hair in the night. I don't accept it completely, she said at last, her voice low and steady. I can't look at what you do and say I'm okay with it. She paused. But I understand. I understand why you became this man. Taehwan looked at her, and for the first time she saw something in his eyes besides coldness. Maybe gratitude. Maybe something deeper neither of them was ready to name. You're not leaving, he said, as if he couldn't believe it. No, Taryn replied. I'm not leaving. And in that moment, in a garden flooded with morning sunlight, something shifted between them. An invisible wall cracked and fell away, and they both knew there was no going back. 2 weeks after that morning in the garden, everything between them had shifted in a way Taryn couldn't put into words. There were no grand declarations, no defining conversation that named what they were. There were only small things, moments accumulating like water seeping through stone, slowly wearing down the wall between them. Taehwan began to appear at the most unexpected times. One afternoon, when Taryn was getting ready for her scheduled video call with Suyeon at the hospital, he appeared in the doorway of the library with his laptop in hand. I'm joining you, he said. Not a question, not an offer, just a simple statement. Taryn wanted to refuse, but his gaze didn't leave her room to try. They sat side by side on the library sofa. When Suyeon's face appeared on the screen, brighter, healthier, with color in her cheeks for the first time in months, Taryn felt tears prick her eyes. After the call ended, Taryn sat in silence, her heart heavy with guilt. Lying to her sister felt like swallowing glass. Taehwan must have sensed it because he said quietly, when this is over, you can tell her the truth. I won't stop you. Something in his voice made her chest ache. Then there were the nights. Taryn still had nightmares, not as often as before, but they came. And every time she jolted awake, drenched in cold sweat, her heart hammering, she heard footsteps stop outside her bedroom door. Taehwan didn't knock. He didn't come in. He only stood there in the darkness of the hallway. A silent night watchman. Taryn never opened the door, but just knowing he was there was enough to let her breathe again, to let sleep find her once more. One evening when Taehwan still hadn't returned from a meeting that ran late, Taryn decided to cook. She made her grandmother's mac and cheese, the real kind, with sharp cheddar and a breadcrumb crust. She made collard greens with smoked turkey. She even made cornbread from scratch. The smell filled the vast, rarely used kitchen, and for a moment, Taryn felt like herself again. Taehwan walked in as she was setting the table in the smaller breakfast nook instead of the formal dining room. He stopped in the doorway, looked at her, then at the steaming dishes, and went completely still. You cooked for me, he asked, his voice strange, as if she'd done something he couldn't quite understand. Taryn shrugged, trying to sound casual even though her heart was pounding. I was hungry, and I made too much. It would be a waste. They ate together in silence, but it was a different kind of silence, warmer, closer. Taehwan took his first bite of mac and cheese, and Taryn watched, his eyes widen slightly. This is... He paused, searching for words. My mother used to make something similar, different ingredients, Korean style, but the same comfort, the same warmth. He looked at her across the table, and in the soft light, Taryn could have sworn she saw the shadow of a smile pass over his mouth. Thank you, he said quietly. I haven't tasted anything like this since she died. Taryn felt something shift in her chest. Something dangerous and terrifying and wonderful all at once. 3 days later, everything changed completely. Taehwan came home close to midnight, and Taryn, who'd been waiting, even though she'd never admit it, heard the front door shut. She stepped out of her room and found him leaning against the hallway wall, one hand pressed to his side. In the dim light, she saw a dark stain spreading across his white shirt. He was hurt. Taehwan. Taryn rushed to him, instinct stronger than reason. She supported him into her bathroom, flipped on the light, and started unbuttoning his shirt without thinking. Taehwan didn't object. He sat on the edge of the bathtub, his face pale but his eyes never leaving hers. The wound wasn't too deep, but it was bleeding heavily, a long cut along his ribs, as if someone had used a knife. Taryn grabbed the first aid kit, her hands trembling slightly as she began to clean the injury. She felt Taiwan's muscles tense under her fingers, his skin burning hot, his breath brushing down into her hair. The bathroom suddenly felt too small, the air thick and heavy like the moments before a storm. "You should call a doctor," Taryn whispered, trying to focus on the wound instead of his skin beneath her hands, instead of the way his chest rose and fell with each breath. "No need," Taiwan said, his voice low and rough. "You're doing fine." Taryn looked up and realized his face was so close she could count every eyelash. His midnight eyes held hers with an intensity that made her forget how to breathe. His hand suddenly closed around her wrist, stopping her. "Taryn," he said. Just her name. A single word. But the way he spoke it sounded like a prayer. "This deal, I don't know what's real anymore." Taryn's heart stalled for a beat. She understood what he meant. The line between acting and truth had blurred somewhere along the way, and she couldn't separate them anymore either. "Maybe I don't know either," she whispered. That was all Taiwan needed to hear. He pulled her in and their mouths met. The first kiss wasn't gentle or sweet. It was violent as a storm, desperate as a dying thirst, full of feelings held down too long and finally breaking loose. Taiwan kissed her like she was air and he was drowning. Taryn kissed him back with everything she had, her hands gripping his shoulders, forgetting the wound, forgetting everything except him. His hands were in her hair, tilting her head back, deepening the kiss until she couldn't tell where she ended, and he began. Then Taiwan's phone rang, shattering the moment. He broke the kiss but didn't let go of her, his forehead pressed to hers, his breathing hard. The phone kept ringing. Taiwan muttered a curse in Korean and answered. "Mo, what?" he growled. Taryn saw his expression change as he listened to Minjun, from raw hunger to cold control in a heartbeat, his midnight eyes turning hard as steel. He ended the call and stood, completely ignoring that the wound still wasn't bandaged. "Taehwan?" Taryn asked, alarmed. "Kim Dong-gyu's made his move," he said, his voice thick with thunder. "They burned 2 of our warehouses in Incheon. This is a declaration of war." He looked at her, and in that instant the man who'd just kissed her vanished. In his place stood the Taiwan Park all of Seoul feared. "Don't leave the house," he said, "for any reason. I'll get ye, understand?" Then he disappeared into the night, leaving Taryn alone in the bathroom, her lips still burning with the taste of him, and a new fear growing larger inside her chest. The storm had arrived, and she was standing right at its center. The days that followed turned the Park estate into a wartime fortress. Taryn barely saw Taiwan. He vanished into closed-door meetings that stretched on for hours in his study, while men with faces as cold as stone moved in and out without pause. She only knew what Minjun told her in the rare moments he wasn't pulled away by something urgent. The warehouses that burned had held millions of dollars in goods. 3 Park family men were injured, one of them in critical condition. These were no longer veiled threats. Kim Dong-gyu had officially declared war. On the 5th day, as Taryn sat in the library pretending to read, her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. She opened it, and her blood turned to ice. "Your sister is at Emory University Hospital, room 847. It would be a shame if something happened to her while she's recovering so well. Meet me alone at the abandoned factory in Guro District 10 p.m. tonight. Don't tell anyone. If I see any of the Park family men, your sister won't live to see morning. Esh, Sang-hoon, Kim Dong-gyu's son." Taryn had to grip the arm of the chair to keep from collapsing. Soo-yeon, her sister, the only person she had left in this world. She knew it was a trap. She wasn't stupid, but she also knew she didn't have a choice. She'd sacrificed everything for Soo-yeon since their parents died. She couldn't let anything happen to her now, not when she was only just beginning to recover. Taryn deleted the message and set her phone down. 10 p.m. She had a few hours to figure out how to get out of here without anyone knowing. And then she would face the devil to protect the person she loved most. Alone. Taryn waited until Minjun switched shifts at 9 p.m., that brief window when he stepped away to check the perimeter. She slipped out the back entrance like a shadow, her heart slamming wildly in her chest, and ran through the pitch-dark garden to the side gate she'd discovered during her days of house arrest. The taxi she'd pre-booked using a translation app was waiting on the corner, and within 30 minutes, she was on her way to Guro District. The abandoned factory sat at the edge of an industrial area, a hulking concrete skeleton with shattered windows and graffiti-covered walls. Weeds choked the ground around it. Not a single light, not a single sound. Taryn stepped out of the taxi, paid, and watched the car disappear into the dark. She knew this was a trap. She'd known from the beginning, but when she thought of Suyan, she had no other choice. Taryn walked toward the factory's rusted metal door, and that was when she saw them. 4 men emerged from the darkness, closing in from every side. She spun to run, but a rough hand seized her arm and yanked her back. Taryn screamed, one hand clawing for the phone in her jacket pocket. In that split second of chaos, with hands searching her and pulling at her clothes, Taryn managed one thing. Her finger swiped across the screen, turned on location sharing, and sent it to Taiwan's number before the phone was ripped from her grasp. She prayed the message had gone through. They dragged her inside the factory, where a bare bulb swung overhead, spilling weak yellow light onto a metal chair set in the middle of the empty space. Sang-hoon stood there with his hands in his pockets, a vicious smile on a face that was cruelly handsome, like a beautiful snake. "Miss Casey," he said in English, his accent heavy but clear. "Thank you for coming. I knew you wouldn't disappoint me." Taryn was shoved into the chair, her hands tied behind her back with coarse rope that bit into her skin. She lifted her chin towards Sang-hoon, fighting to keep the fear from rising and choking her. "My sister," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "You promised you wouldn't touch her." Sang-hoon gave a short laugh. "Oh, your sister's fine. I'm not the kind of man who breaks his word." He tilted his head, studying her the way a cat studies a mouse. "But that depends on your cooperation." He began to circle her, his shoes tapping a steady rhythm on the concrete floor. "I want to know about Taiwan, his weaknesses, his plans, what he's preparing to do in response to my father." "I don't know anything about his business," Taryn said. It was the truth. Taiwan never told her about those things. Sang-hoon stopped in front of her and bent down until his face was only inches from hers. "You're lying." The next thing he didn't say with words, he said it with his fist. Pain exploded across Taryn's cheek, snapping her head to the side, blood flooding her mouth, but she didn't scream. She clenched her teeth and stared straight into Sang-hoon's eyes. "I don't know anything." He hit her again, and again. Each blow came like a wave of pain crashing through her body. Taryn felt her lips split, her eyes swelling shut, blood running down her chin. But she didn't speak. She couldn't betray Taiwan. Even if she did know something, she'd rather die. Sang-hoon stepped back, breathing hard with rage. He looked at her as if she made no sense at all. "Why?" he demanded, his voice sharp with frustration. "You're just a pawn in his game. A business deal, right? He pays. You play fiancé. Why are you protecting a man like him?" Taryn looked up at Sang-hoon through the one eye that wasn't swollen shut, blood and tears mingling on her face. And in that moment, in the middle of pain and fear, she understood a truth she'd been running from for far too long. She loved Taiwan Park, not because he saved Suyan, not because of the safety he offered, but because of who he was, with all his darkness and light, with the scars on his soul and the tender moments he showed only her. "Because he deserves to be protected," Taryn said, her voice raw but steady. "That's the only reason I need." Sang-hoon stared at her for a long time. Then he laughed, the sound cold, echoing through the empty factory. "Sarang? Love?" He spat on the floor. "That stupid feeling is going to kill you." Taryn closed her eyes as the next blow landed. She thought of Taiwan, of their kiss, of quiet mornings in the dining room, of the way he'd sat beside her in the darkness when she needed someone most. She prayed the shared location had reached him. She prayed he'd find her. Back at the Park estate, Taehwan's phone suddenly buzzed. He picked up the phone and saw the location share notification from Taran. Guro District. Abandoned factory complex. The blood in his veins froze for a second, then boiled like a volcano. "Min-jun," he roared, kicking his chair back as he surged to his feet. Min-jun rushed in and witnessed something he'd never seen in 8 years of working for Taehwan Park. Taehwan losing control. He swept everything on the desk onto the floor with a furious bellow, his face white as a corpse, his midnight eyes burning like hell. "Taran," he rasped in Korean, thrusting the phone at Min-jun. "They took her. Kim Dong-gyu took her. Call everyone. Jigum. Now." Taehwan didn't wait for the full team to assemble. He stormed out of the estate with a loaded gun in his hand. Min-jun racing after him. Within 15 minutes, 4 black Genesis SUVs tore through the night toward Guro District at a madman's speed. Taehwan sat in the front seat, his jaw clenched so tightly Min-jun could hear his teeth grinding, his midnight eyes burning like embers in hell. He didn't say a single word the entire way. Everyone in the vehicle understood that if anything had happened to Taran, a lot of people were going to die tonight. They stopped a few hundred meters from the factory complex, and Tai Hwan didn't wait for anyone. He got out and walked straight toward the metal door like a death omen given human form. No cover, no strategy, no hesitation. The first gunshot cracked the air when Tai Hwan blew the lock apart. What happened after that was a storm of violence Min Jun knew he'd never forget. Tai Hwan moved like a killing machine, precise and merciless. Every bullet found its target. Kim Dong-gyu's men dropped one by one. Nobody could stop him. Tai Hwan kicked the door to the main room open and froze. Taryn was there, bound to a metal chair, her head slumped against her chest. Her face was bruised and swollen. Dried blood crusted on her split lips. For one horrifying moment, Tai Hwan thought she was dead. His heart stopped. The world stopped turning. Then Taryn lifted her head. The one eye she could still open found him. "You came," she rasped. "I knew you would." Tai Hwan lunged to her, his hands shaking as he cut the ropes. When the last knot gave way, he dragged her into his arms and held her tight as if she might vanish the second he let go. "Taryn," he whispered into her hair, his voice shaking. "G-ball. Don't ever do this to me again. Don't ever." Taryn sagged against his chest, too weak to answer, but her hand fisted in his shirt like it was the only lifeline left in the world. Min Jun stepped closer. "Tai Hwan si. Sang-hoon got away, but we caught Kim Dong-gyu." Tai Hwan lifted his head, his midnight eyes turning to ice. "Keep him. I'll deal with him later." Then his gaze swept the room and landed on a man sprawled on the floor, moaning, his fists still stained with Taryn's blood. Tai Hwan set Taryn down gently, braced her against the wall and stood. "You're the one who hit her." Not a question. A verdict. What happened next? Taryn didn't see because she closed her eyes, but she heard bone snap, heard a scream pierce the air, and then silence. When she opened her eyes, Tai Hwan was back at her side, his hands smeared with blood. Yet his gaze held nothing but tenderness when it found her. He bent and lifted her into his arms, gentle as if she were the most precious thing on earth. As they stepped outside, Min Jun handed Taryn's phone to Tai Hwan, found this in the pocket of one of them. Tai Hwan looked at the screen and went still. "You sent me your location," he said, astonishment thick in his voice. Taryn blinked up at him through swollen lids. "I knew I couldn't beat them," she whispered. "But I could help you find me." Tai Hwan looked at her, and something in those midnight eyes shifted for good. "You're extraordinary," he said, his voice rough with feeling. On the drive back to the estate, Tai Hwan sat in the back seat with Taryn in his arms, refusing to let anyone else touch her. Taryn rested against his chest, listening to his heart hammer wildly. And for the first time in that long, horrific night, she felt safe. "Dasi Neril il Chian Hul Goya," he whispered into the darkness like a sacred vow. "I won't lose you. Never again." Taryn tightened her grip on his hand, letting him know she'd heard him and she believed him. We're in the home stretch now. If you've made it this far, you're invested in Taryn and Tai Hwan's story. Hit that subscribe button because the ending is going to leave you breathless. Now, let's continue. 3 days passed like a dream. Taryn lay in bed with peonies on the nightstand, her body aching in every small place, yet tended with meticulous care by the Park family's private doctor. But what shocked her most wasn't how her body healed. It was the man who didn't leave her room for those 72 hours. Tai Hwan sat in the armchair beside her bed, midnight eyes shadowed from sleeplessness, refusing to move no matter how Min Jun opak Seon he pleaded. On the morning of the 4th day, when Taryn was finally strong enough to sit up without dizziness, she looked at Tai Hwan and said, "I'm sorry." "What are you sorry for?" "For going alone. For putting myself in danger after you'd warned me." Tai Hwan stood and came to her bedside. "Do you know what I felt when that location message came through? I thought you were dead. I thought I would find you the way I'd found my mother. And in those minutes, I realized something." He sat on the edge of the bed, took her hand in his, and looked straight into her eyes. "Losing you was more terrifying than losing my entire empire." He paused. "The deal is over. You're free. I'll still take care of Soo-yeon. But you don't have to stay here anymore." Taryn stared at him, at the man giving her freedom, and in that moment, she knew with absolute certainty that she didn't want to go anywhere. "No," she said, steady and clear. "I don't want freedom. I want to stay here with you, not because of a deal, not because of Soo-yeon, but because I want to be with you." She drew a deep breath. "I love you, Tai Hwan Park." Tai Hwan said nothing. He only looked at her, his midnight eyes shining. Then he leaned down and kissed her, Not the violent kiss from the bathroom, but a kiss that was gentle and slow. Like a vow. Like a promise. That afternoon, when Tae-hwan finally agreed to leave the room, there came a soft knock at the door. Park Jin-woo, the Park family patriarch, stepped inside. He sat in the chair Tae-hwan had just left and studied Taran in silence. Then he spoke in accented English. "Welcome to the family, daughter. You could have run. You owed this family nothing, but you chose silence. You protected my grandson. Loyalty like that cannot be bought. From this moment on, you are Park family, because you deserve it." Taran felt her eyes sting. In her entire life, she had never had a real family, and now the most powerful man in Seoul was telling her she belonged here. "Gamsahamnida," she whispered. "Thank you." Park Jin-woo nodded and rose to leave. "Take care of my grandson," he said. "He needs you more than he thinks." The door closed, and Taran sat alone, tears sliding down her cheeks. Not tears of sorrow, but the tears of someone who had finally found where she belonged. 2 weeks later, Taran had recovered completely, but what made her happiest wasn't her own strength returning. It was the video call from Emery that morning. Soo-yeon had been discharged. The transplant had been an unqualified success. Taran cried when she heard it, bright tears of happiness. Soo-yeon would live. Soo-yeon would be well. That afternoon, Tae-hwan found her in the library. "Come with me," he said. "There's somewhere I want to take you." Taran followed him into the garden, past rose beds, past the koi pond, until they stopped beneath the ancient pine tree, the place where everything between them had started to change. And then he did something she never could have imagined. Tae-hwan Park slowly lowered himself onto one knee in front of her. Taran's heart stopped. He drew a small black velvet box from his pocket and opened it. Inside was a jade ring, a deep green stone set in platinum, surrounded by small diamonds. "The first time I met you, everything was fake," Tae-hwan said, his voice trembling. "The first time I called you my fiancé, it was a strategic necessity." He paused. "But somewhere along the road from that lie, everything became real. You became real to me." "The first time was a lie. This time is real. Taran Casey, will you be my wife?" Taran felt tears spill over. She stared at the man kneeling before her, the man who'd saved her sister, protected her, opened himself to her. "Yes," she whispered, then said it louder. "Yes, I want to." Tae-hwan rose and slid the ring onto her finger. The ring fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her alone. Then he pulled her into his arms and kissed her in a garden drenched in late afternoon sun. When they went back inside, Park Seon-hee was waiting by the entrance, her eyes red with tears. She held Taran the way a mother holds her own daughter, murmuring blessings in Korean. Park Jin-woo stood behind her, nodding to Tae-hwan, then to Taran, his gaze warmer than any words. That perfect moment lasted until Minjun appeared at the far end of the hall, his face drawn tight. "Tae-hwan, see," Minjun said. "Someone sent a gift. You need to see this." On the desk sat a small wooden box. Tae-hwan lifted the lid, and the room seemed to freeze. Inside lay a traditional jangdo, a Korean short sword, its blade gleaming, resting on red silk. "Boksu," Minjun said. "Vendetta, Sang-hoon Kim. He's declaring this personal now." Tae-hwan stared at the blade for a long moment, then closed the box. "He wants war," Tae-hwan said. His calm so frightening it barely sounded human. "He'll get war." Taran looked down at the jade ring on her hand. Minutes ago she'd been living the happiest moment of her life. Now she understood the real fight was only beginning, and this time she wouldn't stand outside it. 1 month later, Taran stood before the mirror in a burgundy evening gown, the jade ring glittering on her finger. Tonight she and Tae-hwan would attend an opera performance at the Seoul Arts Center. Even though Sang-hoon was still at large, they couldn't live in fear forever. And Taran refused to let anyone steal her life from her again. The Seoul Arts Center glittered like a palace. Taran entered with Tae-hwan, her hand resting on his arm, her head held high. She no longer felt lost among the elite. She belonged here now. At intermission, she asked to step out for a moment. Tae-hwan hesitated but nodded. Taran walked along a quiet corridor. She paused before a large traditional painting, and that was when she felt his presence. Taran turned and saw Sang-hoon standing a few steps away. "Miss Casey," he said. "Or should I call you the future Mrs. Park instead?" Taran felt her heart speed up, but she didn't step back. "Sang-hoon," she said calmly. "You're reckless to show up here." Sang-hoon took one step closer. "This isn't over," My father might be in your hands, but the Kim Empire still exists, and we will take everything back, starting with you. Taryn remembered the night in the factory, remembered pain and terror, but she also remembered what had helped her survive: resilience, love, the decision to never become a victim again. Last time I hadn't been ready, Taryn said, but this time is different. I'm no longer the weak girl you thought I was. I'm Taehwan Park's fiancé, and I won't let you or anyone else threaten my family. Sang-hoon blinked, clearly startled. He opened his mouth to say something, but footsteps sounded behind them. Taehwan appeared at the far end of the corridor, Minjun close behind. Taehwan's midnight eyes turned ice cold, but he didn't rush. He simply walked to Taryn, set a possessive hand at her waist, and looked at Sang-hoon with chilled contempt. "Jakyun Num, little man," Taehwan said. "Get out before I change my mind about keeping tonight peaceful." Sang-hoon knew he was outmatched. He took a step back, the smile still on his lips, poison in his eyes. "We'll meet again," he said. "And next time, the outcome will be different." Then he turned and vanished into the crowd like a ghost. Taehwan pulled Taryn into his arms, his grip tightening. "Gwenchana, are you all right?" Taryn nodded, resting against his chest. "I'm fine. I'm not afraid of him anymore." They didn't stay to watch the rest of the opera. They rode in silence as the Genesis glided through Seoul streets at night. Taryn leaned her head on Taehwan's shoulder and watched the city slide past neon signs, high-rises reaching toward the stars, a city that no longer felt foreign but like home. "Has the real war begun?" she asked softly. Taehwan wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "Yes," he said. "Sang-hoon won't stop. He wants revenge. What will we do?" Taehwan looked down at her, his midnight eyes blazing with resolve and love. "We'll face it together," he said. "I don't know what the future will bring, but I know one thing." He kissed her forehead. "I won't let anyone hurt you again. Sisangol da te wo beril girado, even if I have to burn the whole world to do it." Taryn looked down at the jade ring on her hand, the green stone flashing under the passing streetlights. She thought of the girl who had sat alone at Hannah's wedding months ago, the black woman from Atlanta with calloused hands and a scarred heart, feeling invisible and out of place. That girl was gone. In her place stood Taryn Casey, the woman who would soon become Taryn Park. The woman who had learned that love could be found in the most unexpected places, across oceans and cultures and worlds. The woman who had proven that even in the deepest darkness there was always light if you were brave enough to search for it. The storm was only beginning, but together they would survive it, or they would burn the world trying. And that was the story of Taryn and Taehwan, two lonely souls who found each other among lies and discovered the truest kind of love. A black woman from Atlanta and a Korean mafia boss who should never have crossed paths, yet fate and a desperate mother's plea over afternoon tea brought them together. A story that reminds us that sometimes the most artificial beginnings can lead to the most sincere endings. That love doesn't come from perfect circumstances, but from the choice to stay beside each other, no matter how hard life becomes. That family isn't only blood, but also the people willing to fight for you. And that even the coldest hearts can melt when they meet the right person. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe and hit that notification bell so you won't miss the compelling stories we share every day. Drop a comment below and tell me what you felt. I read every single one. Share this video with someone who needs to hear a story about love crossing boundaries and second chances. Thank you for staying with me until the very end. Wishing you and your family abundant health, joy, and peace. Until next time.